Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Best Damn Pod in the Land. I am your host and sports director, Brian Nelson, and with me I have...
The one and only, the only man in the room with over-the-ear headphones, your assistant sports editor, Andy Anders.
I'm the assistant sports director, Khaled Hashi.
And I'm Griffin Strom, your sports editor.
And today we have a big, juicy game to recap, the Ohio State-Michigan State game. Yes, I figured that would make you guys laugh.
Big and juicy.
Big and juicy. Ohio State won 34-10. It was, pretty... Can you not, Squid?
Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, Andy, what did you think of the game? Let's just go into that.
Well, assuming I won't be interrupted by more laughter.
Never.
For those of you who haven't watched previous episodes, we've started with laughter before. Hopefully this doesn't continue like that did.
Technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties. Anyway, so Ohio State, Michigan State. I think this game didn't make the same statement they did against Nebraska, but it was interesting to see how they scaled against a top 25 opponent. Ohio State still looked like one of the best teams in the country, one of the most complete teams in the country. Again, maybe not the statement they made going on the road and just absolutely dismantling Nebraska like they did. But I think this was a quality win. The second half didn't feel as close as the score may have indicated, with it being 27-10 for all of the third quarter and then 34-10 the final score. It was really interesting to see how this offense scaled to a tougher defense like Michigan State. I thought it might scale a little better, but still effective enough, especially after that rough first quarter, to comfortably beat a good Michigan State team.
Yeah, Andy, and you know that defense, that vaunted Michigan State front, giving up just 54.6, I believe it was, rushing yards per game coming into the matchup, which was good for fourth best in the entire nation. And in that first quarter, they didn't give up a single yard on the ground. They did gain yardage, but with the net, with a couple of those sacks that the Fields took, I believe like an 18-yard sack on his very second drop back, that kind of killed any momentum that the run game was having there and put Ohio State in a couple of positions where they're behind the eight ball. And you really saw the offense struggle early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and speaking of how they struggled early, that's one of my biggest takeaways, the fact that, we've seen them come off to such a strong start, such a fast start so often that we haven't really seen them hit adversity early in the game. But against Michigan State, they started the first couple of series off slow with a couple 3-and-outs. They punted a couple times, so we were wanting to see how they're going to respond. And in the second quarter, they put up 24 points. So they responded well. It was great to see the offensive line open up such big holes for J.K. Dobbins in the run game. I feel like that the running game credit goes to the running backs more than it does the offensive line, so it's good. I think it's time to actually put that stamp of approval on this offensive line and say, they're one of the best in the nation, and they deserve their credit. And then also it's good to see Benjamin Victor. We've been hearing a lot about potential. And I feel like this year he's had a strong start to the season. He's finally showing off his potential, and he's having a lot of success on the field. He has 79 yards and a touchdown on 3 catches, so he's been that big play guy along with Chris Olave. So there's a lot of good takeaways I've taken away from this game.
There's definitely a lot to break down. I think we'll kind of start with the offensive line because I think that's something that's very noteworthy. I think when we've been analyzing the offensive line throughout the episodes of this podcast, mainly we've just been focusing on they have a lot of depth and a lot of talent. But I think tonight to kind of showcase all the skill that they have and the precision this offensive line has with the holes they were able to create for Dobbins and the way they were able to really turn the tide against this vaunted Michigan State defense that was so good with their running defense, and that really kind of broke the game open in the second quarter. And I think that's something that the offensive line deserves a ton of credit for.
Something that's really stuck out to me, I know I probably broadcast this a little too much. I played line in high school, which, oh my goodness, what expertise he played in high school. 2-year varsity.
I've actually never heard that before.
This is shocking news.
What shocking news? What is impressive? I'll tell you a story from my high school days. Just a short one. So when I was my first 3 years at Unioto High School, we played in a power classic wing tee offense, like something that hasn't been run except by service schools since the 30s, where you are blocking this guy. It's a down block or it's a base block. You have a specific type of block. You know who you're blocking, what type of block it is. You go to this guy, and you just you try and move him, you push him, you manhandle him, whatever. And then my senior year, we got a new offensive coordinator. Shout out Brian. Shout out to Coach Netter if you're watching.
Shout out Brian Nelson.
Yeah, give me shouts.
Well,
I'm the best offensive coordinator in the best damn land.
right. But Coach Netter instituted something that it took way too long for us to adjust to as an offense. And that's what they've run with success since I left, but that didn't work for us my senior year. We had to switch as linemen from that style of blocking to spread. And spread is way different as an offensive lineman. Spread is zone blocking. So what essentially happens is you step to a spot and you block whoever's in that spot. And it's not based as much on moving guys off the ball because the running back doesn't have a designated hole. It's based more on occupying a guy and getting everyone blocked, and then the running back kind of finds his own hole. And the ability of this offensive line to switch between both styles is just so impressive to me as a former lineman, because I was given a whole year to switch between styles. I almost couldn't do it. These guys are doing it in game. These guys are doing it between snaps. And doing both styles with an incredible efficiency. And I think what helps is that they've kind of hybridized, when I watch them, the zone blocking to where when they step to that spot and they block a player, they still try to move him. Right. They come out with the same aggression that you would on a power block for a zone block. But also, like, you see great holes open up because of a little technique things. Like, I was watching on, I think it was the 67-yard touchdown run Dobbins had. A defensive tackle, came upfield on Davis, and instead of just trying to occupy him and move him the direction he wanted to go, he just said, okay, I'll let his momentum take him over here, and it opened a huge hole for Dobbins. Using someone's momentum against him like that is a great O-line technique that doesn't look, you might not see it on film and point to it. It's not as impressive as a straight-up pancake block, but it's,
It helps. It definitely helps, yeah.
I know I went on a tangent a little there, but it's very impressive, the versatility and the technique of this offensive line when I watch it back on film.
Well, you mentioned Dobbins here and how the offensive line helped create holes. But let's talk about Dobbins in the game that he had. He had a huge game.
Yeah.
And
it's becoming normal. He had 179 yards on 24 carries and a touchdown. And currently right now ranks number 2 in the nation in rushing yards behind Chuba Hubbard.
Wow.
So that's crazy to see that production. He's definitely looked like his freshman year self once again, and honestly, he looks better. He looks best he's ever been at Ohio State. So.
And definitely the offensive line deserves a lot of credit for creating the holes. But Dobbins had that 67-yard touchdown run and really just had a lot of long runs against Michigan State. And he's really breaking tackles and creating momentum for himself.
And let's be honest, he's making Justin Fields' job so much more easier. And I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that. We glorify Justin Fields' stats because he's that impressive. Heisman type impressive, but a lot of credit does have to go to the run ability of J.K. Dobbins. Having a back like that opens up the offensive game for Justin Fields and allows him to make great throws and have bigger separation for the receivers because there's less guys out in coverage and more guys in the box trying to contain J.K. That it just makes Justin Fields' job that much easier.
Yeah, and I remember me and Andy actually both had a simultaneous kind of wow reaction to one specific Dobbins run this past weekend, and it wasn't even a 67-yarder. And if you remember, it was that one where he could have easily stepped out of bounds on the sideline on a run to the left side.
I know.
And rather than that, he lowered his shoulder, dipped back in bounds to give a Michigan State defender a crack of that shoulder.
The tone.
He had already broken a tackle on that play too. It was a run left, and he
made
a guy miss. Yep. That's the thing. You get him to the second level, it's so hard for one guy to break him down. So hard even when 3 guys are on him, he carries them for 2 extra yards.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. We talk about how good of a team is Ohio State. Our title of our episode last week is whether they're going to go undefeated or not. And I feel part of the reason why we're so confident starts with J.K. Dobbins and the good games he's been having. If he continues to do that, even when you look at defenses like Wisconsin, Penn State, or Michigan, if he can do that against Michigan State, I see no reason why he can't do that against the other schools.
Right.
Not only JK, though, Master T, we barely saw him on the field this game, and he still ended the game with 90 yards.
Dude, he's a great compliment to Dobbins.
Absolutely.
His strength, if you try to tackle him above the waist, he's
You're
not
going down. Yeah.
He's not going down if you tackle him above the waist. And I think Brandon Bowen, we talked to Brandon Bowen after the game, the right tackle for Ohio State, and he told us when you have a back like that behind you, it motivates you even more as an offensive line. It all feeds into itself. And that's what's so great about this team. When you're so complete like that, it builds a trust and a cohesion with each other. So it's great to hear quotes like that from the players in the postgame.
Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about someone else on the offense who maybe didn't have as good of a game as maybe we're accustomed to, but Justin Fields. Has first interception of his college career, said the writers jinxed him on that one, which I thought was pretty funny. But I still thought he had a pretty good game overall. I mean, Michigan State's is easily the toughest defense he's faced so far, and he still threw for over 200 yards, had 2 touchdowns, and still rushed for a decent amount. Griffin, what did you think about the way he played?
Yeah, so I'll just touch on that opening quarter, because I think that was where we saw the most kind of like errant play from him that we've seen, or erroneous play that we've seen from him so far this year, and we're not accustomed to that. So I remember even Austin Mack a couple weeks ago had remarked that Fields hasn't really had to throw a lot of dangerous passes. He's kind of had the luxury of being able to play it relatively safe. You haven't seen him need to force the ball into like triple coverage or anything like that,
Right.
And so he's facing a better defense this week. And even on the first possession, you saw him not really get his feet set as well as he's been able to so far this season, and you missed a wide open Luke Farrell on his first throw, and that kind of stood out to me as being like, oh, he might be a little jittery this game, just because it is that first home night game against their first ranked opponent. And I think you saw the same thing a couple of times on a couple of different throws. The interception was in the third or fourth quarter. That one sailed on him. You haven't seen that happen much for him. He had another pass at some point where he was scrambling. It seemed like he didn't need to be as rushed as he was, and kind of the ball just looked weird coming off his hands a couple of times. And I don't think you've had to see that, but I still think he obviously bounced back, and they had nearly 300 yards in the second quarter, so it all worked out for Fields.
I mean, I think I'll take a quarterback who can throw for 200 yards, 2 touchdowns, and rush for another touchdown, and still like contribute meaningfully to a team's victory if it's a down game for them. That's still, if that's the worst we can get for him, then Ohio State's in good shape.
I'm kind of happy he got that interception out of the way. Honestly, you never obviously as a quarterback want somebody to throw an interception, but I felt like there was just so much attention on, he hasn't thrown an interception. And for a quarterback who's that young and inexperienced in the college game, I just felt like getting that out the way was kind of like a relief, and now he can just focus on doing well and not worried about, if I make a bad throw, people are going to be talking about it so much,
Mm-hmm.
Right. He also had another turnover there at the end with that strip sack fumble that Michigan State recovered. But, a lot of times with those, like, there's not, besides holding the ball a little bit too long, like, you're not going to attribute like a strip sack to a quarterback being like completely their fault in the same way that an interception might be.
No, that would more be the fault of the defensive line necessarily.
Yeah.
So, but let's kind of focus. We've been talking about like the first and second quarter and kind of like, the shift from Ohio State playing, not so great early on to, exploding for 24 points. But I do want to focus on like one thing that kind of like hindered Ohio State maybe a little bit throughout the entire game, and that was kind of like the amount of penalties they had, which really was like we haven't seen Ohio State get really any penalties through any of the first 5 games, really, and that was
they've been pretty good, yeah.
That was completely different. They had like 10 penalties.
10 penalties for 85 yards, and they were only averaging 4.4 per game coming in.
Yeah.
So they almost they more than doubled and almost tripled their output on penalties there, and a lot of them did come early too. You saw a false start on Wyatt Davis. After that first turnover that Damon Arnett caused, that gave the Ohio State the ball back on like the 27-yard line. And then you saw on those back-to-back possessions where Ohio State got it basically in the red zone, after turnovers, they couldn't move the ball at all. And that penalty on that first one was definitely part of that. Mm-hmm. And then You just saw a lot of them. Like, it seemed like flags were flying. Even on Michigan State, too, there was a lot of calls. But it definitely made for a bit of a sloppier feel early for Ohio State.
Yeah, the refs put their stamp on this game for sure.
Yeah. And then also obviously a big play that happened late was Jordan Fuller returned an interception. It was like 80-something yards for a touchdown.
That was a dumb call.
Yeah, that wasn't a great call.
Yeah.
But at the same time, like, it was a call that was made, and it did harm the Buckeyes and took back that highlight play for Fuller.
Yeah.
It was weak in the traditional football sense. Unfortunately, if you go by the strict letter of the rule, it was the right call. It's just not something you typically make. I think it's one of those kind of things. The penalties in this game were interesting, especially what was really intriguing to me is that you go to Nebraska and you have this this incredible environment. It makes it so tough on an offense. The stadium is loud, and you have no delay of games, no false starts, and really a very clean game penalty-wise against Nebraska. They didn't have many. And that was a great sign of poise from a young quarterback and a young offensive line to not make some of those mental miscues that you usually make on the road. And then you come back and you have some of them at home in a positive environment against Michigan State. I don't know if some of that was the pressure of playing your first-ranked opponent, and I know Day had kind of been building this matchup a little bit in their heads. He called Michigan State's run defense one of the best in the past 2 decades last week. Maybe I think some of those miscues had to do with this being the first test of a young team, but we've seen the poise from them in the past suggest that this may not be an ongoing issue.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's transition a little bit to talk about the way the defense played. We've been giving a lot of credit to the offense and, how they managed to score 34 points and rush a lot against a very good Michigan State defense. But Michigan State's offense wasn't necessarily, bad. It was still probably the most talented they faced so far. And even then, Brian Lewerke had a pretty good game, but Ohio State's defense played very well, and I'd say played better than the offense
Especially
did.
to start the game off with those first 2 series where they caused turnovers. But no, Brian Lewerke, he actually played a pretty good game. He was able to get a couple of drives moving on Ohio State's defense, and unlike Adrian Martinez, he had 218 yards and not 47 passing yards. But no, he played a good game, and also the run game for Michigan State was pretty decent too. Elijah Collins had 63 yards, which isn't great, but compared to what other starting running backs for these teams against Ohio State has been doing, I would say that was a pretty decent game because most of these starting running backs for these other teams like Indiana and Miami, they've been having 10, 15-yard rushing games where
pretty much.
Yeah, so they played a pretty decent game, and Darrell Stewart, he was balling this game for real. He had a couple nice catches. He was kind of jabbing with Jeffrey Kuda after his touchdown catch, so things were kind of getting physical. He had 6 catches for 68 yards and a touchdown. The Michigan State offense, they were able to get a couple possessions moving, but just not enough for this Ohio State, this pressure they were putting on them.
I think what was interesting from this game defensively, Michigan State moved the ball a few times. Lewerke had some very nice throws.
Whoa. And that's coming from you.
That's coming
Possibly
from me.
Brian Lewerke's toughest critic, as I've come to find out in the last few weeks.
He actually he made me look a little bit like a fool this past week, I think.
Briefly.
I don't even know about briefly. He looked pretty good most of the game. I'm willing to admit that.
Didn't do much late.
Didn't do much late, but I mean, a tipped ball. They were in desperation mode at that point. How much can you really blame? But Michigan State took advantage of Ohio State in man coverage a few times. I think when you had Pete Warner lined up against their tight end Trent Gillison, a few plays were made. When you had one of the best receivers in the Big Ten, Darrell Stewart. My bad. In man coverage. Even against Okuda, he made a couple nice plays, which was surprising. That touchdown catch, Okuda was covering him, although it was kind of like a weird alignment to where Okuda had to come across the field to take him on the seam. I think there were some things Michigan State took advantage of, was able to move the ball a little bit, but Ohio State's defense, whenever they needed a big play, came through with one, and Michigan State simply couldn't score on them. Despite crossing the 50, I think 7 times, they only got 10 points. So I think overall, a very good defensive performance from the Buckeyes. Not the domination we saw in the previous 5 games, but certainly there's no concern.
Yeah, and I think a lot of credit has been given to Okuda, especially with his picks in the last couple of games, and even Fuller you've seen have an interception in back-to-back games as well. But I thought personally that, and he really showed it this past game, especially causing a turnover, Damon Arnett on the other side from Okuda has really been having a really good season. Like,
Oh, yeah.
He has been, and we saw him, fired up in that spring practice in the spring before the spring game. He was John then. He's still John now.
With Cody White,
Yeah, he's getting in people's faces, and he's pumped up. It was obviously going to be a big rebound season for him after all the criticism he got last year. And he might have drawn a flag at some point at the end of the game, maybe the third or fourth quarter.
Who was the defensive? They had a defensive holding. I can't remember who it was on.
Maybe it wasn't him because they were talking about how
Arnett was out of the game at that point.
Yeah, he didn't even play in the second half. But when he did play in the first half, he made a couple of big plays, and it doesn't seem like people are getting over on him very much. I mean, even when Cody White did catch that pass on him, you saw Arnett just strip that thing out of there. So he's playing with a different type of energy and
aggressiveness.
And he's been for sure this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely think Arnett deserves a lot of praise. I mean, you look at his stats so far. He had that pick 6 against Indiana, which was really nice to see. That was kind of like the highlight play he's been missing his entire career, and now it seems like he's just locked in, ready to go. And I feel like that kind of goes with most of this defense. I mean, I mentioned this guy last week, but Malik Harrison had such an impressive sack against Michigan State, where it's just like 2 seconds he was tackling the work, in the backfield.
Are you talking about Baron Browning?
Baron Browning, sorry.
Yeah.
Baron Browning, sorry. Yes, not Malik Harrison.
Also tipped the pass that Fuller intercepted.
Yes.
Browning looks really good.
Yes.
Yeah, he's having a really good season.
Mm-hmm. I actually played, I think, did he play more? 11 Warriors came out with their snap counts. Credit to 11 Warriors. I believe I saw he might have played more snaps than Tough Borland last game.
It's trending that way.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Tough Borland still had a pretty good game, too.
No, he made a couple mistakes in there. There was a few mistakes he made. He does a lot of things when he's in that you don't see. He's not a big stat guy, but he's a very disciplined technique player. So he might not get all the credit, but he does a lot of things in there at that middle linebacker position when he's playing that help his teammates out. Someone else makes the tackle because of what he did.
Yeah, he definitely hasn't popped off the field in the way that a couple of the other linebackers have. Even Pete Werner this year has been making a lot of big plays. Baron Browning, obviously, you saw it last game with that sack and just a couple of huge hits this year. Malik Harrison had a fumble recovery this past game, and he's been making plays as well. But it is nice to note that the Tough still does things that might not show up in the stat book or on the screen sometimes.
Right.
Yeah.
Filling the gaps, taking on blockers, those sorts of things. For those of you who might not know. Baron Browning had 41 snaps. Tough Borland had 40. So 1 separating them.
Right. Mm-hmm. And another play I want to highlight on the defense, though, is Sean Wade. I feel like he doesn't get as enough credit as some of these other secondary guys like Damon Arnett and Jeffrey Okuda and Jordan Fuller. But he got Defensive Player of the Game for Ohio State. He had 5 solo tackles, 1 assist tackle, 1 sack, 1 pass breakup, and 1 QB hurry. So he was making plays all over the field, especially, and I feel like that's kind of his new play, which is the slot corner blitz. And he's come through on every single one of those so far this season. So he's been a pretty nice spotlight for this defense.
Coaches were talking about him a lot today at Tuesday Media Availability. Both, I think, Day and Madison talked about just what he brings to the defense, the versatility, the ability to both provide run support because he's so athletic, but also cover those slot guys and those shorter throws. Madison said it opens up the playbook for them. They don't have to. They can run more plays because of what he does. And here's the interesting thing. He actually played the most of any quarterback this past week. 68 snaps as compared to 59 for Jeff Okuda. Again, credit to 11 Warriors for the snap counts. Dan Hope specifically.
How does he even get that number? Those numbers?
You'd have to ask him.
I just rewatched the game in some capacity.
He might.
Every single play. Never mind. Go on.
I mean, there's no way he's getting everybody's snap count.
We're getting off track. Yeah. But yeah, Sean Wade's definitely had a really nice season, and I'm very excited to see.
Yeah, he's one of the best.
What he does in the future.
Yeah.
There is one more defensive player I do want to highlight. I think with the defensive line, most of the love has been going to Chase Young as it should. But Jayshon Cornell had a really good game against Michigan State, and he's been having a really good season overall.
Yeah.
Like, he had 4 tackles and a sack against Michigan State, and it just seemed like he was getting a lot of penetration since, like, Young was getting just more defenders on him, and, like, Cornell just really took advantage of the opportunities presented, and really, I think that the defense overall was just hurrying Lewerke all night.
And Cornell had that big game in the first game of the season, but it was kind of like there were some injuries on the line, and like they were playing a lesser opponent. Like, is he really gonna break out for a couple more performances like that? But I think you saw against Michigan State, he is having an impact still against some of these better opponents as well.
Yeah.
Cornell, I think what's interesting about him, he's quicker, more athletic than a lot of 3 techs you see. He started as a DN, right, and he switched back and forth between DN and D tackle in his career. But yeah, I think he's very quick and athletic as far as a 3 tech goes.
All right. Well, is there anything else we kind of want to recap from the Ohio State-Michigan State game specifically?
Don't think so.
Don't think so?
Nope.
Well, I think it's time to move into kind of
a
newer segment. Since we don't have a game to preview this week, since Ohio State has a bye week, we thought we'd kind of go through kind of like the rest of the nation in college football and just see how everything's going, kind of maybe give some of our opinions on who we think should be ranked higher or who should be in the Heisman race right now.
Yeah,
Andy.
I think we should do a thing where we just all go around and say, if the college football season ended today, who would be our first 4 in? And you can make your prediction for like who wins SEC if that kind of makes
I'm not projecting easier forward. I'm just going to say who I would pick the 4 right now. So there might be a couple teams in here who knock each other out. Keep that in mind. My first team would be LSU. Their offense this year with Joe Burrow has been phenomenal to watch. I think that was the piece they were always missing, was a quarterback. Right. I'd like to see a little more consistency from them on defense, but they've had one of the best wins against Texas among the top teams. There's a lot of reasons to like LSU. They're complete, like Ohio State is. I think Ohio State and LSU have been the two most complete teams. I then put Ohio State second. Don't have that signature win yet, although Michigan State was a nice win. Nebraska was a good statement win. And they actually have the best overall S&P Plus ratings from their opponents. S&P Plus advanced statistics that essentially set your strength of schedule. They've played the most consistently difficult schedule, but they don't have a signature win yet. You'd like to see them against that signature opponent. Before, I think you put them at number 1, but they are number 2 for me. 3, I'm going to say Alabama. Alabama has all the talent, no questions on offense. Few consistency issues on defense. They've been injured, but if they get healthy, and the 31 points against Ole Miss was concerning, but if they get healthy, I think the Crimson Tide should be back as far as talent goes. They're definitely there. 4, it's kind of tough. Based off what we've seen so far, what the wins are, what the schedule is, I am going to put in that position, I think, Georgia, as opposed to Clemson, or I would probably put Clemson 6, Oklahoma 5. I think Oklahoma still isn't where they need to be defensively. Georgia has, obviously, the win against Notre Dame, which is looking better and better as Notre Dame's played better. Still not 100% sold on Notre Dame because they're almost kind of consistently overrated. But maybe not this year. Georgia's looked pretty complete.
I think it's fair to say at least Notre Dame's a top 10 team in the country, especially when they were in the playoff last year.
Right. So Georgia's 4, and then my first 2 out would be 5, Clemson, because they just haven't looked like the national champion team they're supposed to be, especially on offense. And then Oklahoma, it's at 5, ahead of them, actually.
Okay. Well, Griffin, Click, kind of what are your thoughts on Andy's analysis, and what are you guys thinking?
So mine's kind of similar. I'm going to switch Ohio State and Alabama at 1 and 2. I'm going to put Ohio State at number 1. I'll put Alabama at 2. Coming in at 3, I'll put Georgia. Actually, I lied. I'll take that back. I'm putting LSU in there.
Yeah.
And then at 4, I'm putting Oklahoma. So my first team out is going to be Clemson. Like you said, they're just not impressive at all right now. I don't see them. I mean, with the way their schedule is set up, they could easily run the table. I mean, the ACC is one of the weakest conferences.
And they can fix it. I think they might be the most talented team in the country still.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's one comparison about this Clemson team that I just thought of. Clemson reminds me of like the 2014 Florida State team, where I believe they went undefeated in the regular season, but they were like the 3 seed in the inaugural playoff just because they were bad all season. Like they ran the table, but their strength of schedule was so bad.
Yeah.
And then they got mollywopped by Oregon.
Yeah.
Yep.
It reminds me more of 2015 Ohio State.
Well, that's
Yeah.
we
We
made
talked
that
about
comparison
that
last week. I was
right.
trying to be unique.
Trying to be
Different.
because everyone on the Ohio State beat is given that take. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And that Florida State team, like, they were just squeaking out wins every week too,
Mm-hmm.
kind of like you've seen with Clemson. Like, and it's hard to discount a team that did win the national championship and looked so dominant last season. But if we're basing things off of what we've seen just this season, I don't think you can put Clemson in that top 4 right now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they might, if things keep going as they are, I think they will end up there because of that kind of bias from the selection committee.
Mm-hmm. And I do think that things are very likely to change this week. We've been saying like the Oklahoma, you guys aren't having Oklahoma in your top 4. I personally think that they are a top 4 team.
I put them in.
Yeah, I
I
did.
put Oklahoma
did?
in my
Okay.
top 4 as well.
I was the only
So
one.
You're the
I
only
said
one.
Ohio State, Alabama, LSU, and Oklahoma.
I had them.
So you-
fifth.
so you
I was
have-
the first team out.
Okay.
Oklahoma.
Yeah.
So because I think Oklahoma this week is just going to get a boost to their resume. They're probably going to beat Texas. I think they will at least.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Oklahoma probably has the best offense in the country. And
Yeah.
and their defense, I think, uncharacteristically, actually has looked pretty decent compared to years past.
Decent.
This is. Go ahead. I was
Yeah.
about to say. I have a question. If Oklahoma loses to Texas, does Texas start to jump into that conversation of college football playoff worthy because their only loss being to LSU?
Yeah, I think if Texas runs the table, I think there's a good chance they get in.
There's a decent chance.
The only issue would be then
They would probably have to beat Oklahoma in a rematch.
probably beat Oklahoma in a rematch, and you'd have a situation where I think you'd be choosing between them and maybe a one-loss SEC team that didn't make the title game or lost in the title game, something of that nature.
Yeah.
Like, say, for example, Georgia loses to Alabama in the SEC title game, and Georgia then has that win against Notre Dame also on their strength
Along
of schedule.
with the SEC gauntlet, yeah.
Yeah, because Georgia still has to play Florida, I believe. I don't think they play LSU.
I'm not sure. I'd have to look.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But yeah, I don't know. It's tough. I think my top 4. I think I put LSU at number 1 right now, just because I think they have the best. I think they've looked the best and have played the best teams. I put Ohio State number 2 because I think Ohio State's probably the most complete team and has the best strength of schedule. And then 3, I don't know. It's tough. I almost want to put Georgia number 3 just because their win against Notre Dame is better than anything Alabama has, and I just think Oklahoma's looked better than Alabama has so
We
far.
have Alabama.
Hot take.
Alabama out.
I think Alabama is probably the best team in the SEC. I'm going off of what I've seen so far, and Georgia has looked like a very good team. I think Notre Dame's defense is very legit, and Georgia played very well against them the entire game.
So you have 2 SEC teams in your top 4, but not the team that you think is the best SEC team?
Yeah, just based off their resume so far, Georgia and LSU have looked better than Alabama. I think Alabama, once they get players back from the injury, are just like historically how good Alabama's been in the past, will probably be the best team that will come out of this SEC gauntlet unscathed. But do I think that they're the best team right now based on what I've seen? No, I think LSU and Georgia have a better resume.
That's fair.
Interesting.
And guys, while we're talking rankings, and while we're looking ahead, at this kind of post-bye week landscape for Ohio State, we do have in the rankings Michigan creeping up to number 16, Penn State cracking the top 10 now, and you got Wisconsin staying at number 8. So, we've got 2 top 10 opponents for Ohio State still coming up, and Michigan, if they continue to rebound from that Wisconsin loss.
They could honestly perhaps drop that Wisconsin game as long as they keep it close, even though I don't think they will. They could drop that Wisconsin game and then beat them in a Big Ten title rematch and probably still make the playoff.
That would set up some,
Because of
some
how good they
interesting
play.
storylines, I think, if that was to happen, if they got that rematch.
Who's
if
your
they did lose that
They,
one.
they seem
My
destined
4th
for
team
it.
is Oklahoma.
Okay.
Actually, I'm going to swap Georgia and LSU. And I'll put LSU at 3 and Georgia at number 1 because I think Georgia's win against Notre Dame was actually
Wow.
really good.
Georgia. Wow. Okay.
I think Georgia.
I don't think Jake Fromm's looked that good to me.
Georgia, always the
Yeah,
bridesmaid,
they-
never the bride.
I think there's some.
I don't know.
offense there.
Well, I don't know. It's tough because I don't know. I'm putting LSU, like I had LSU at number 1, but the kicker is I don't think LSU will beat Alabama, and until I can see that LSU can really beat a team like Alabama, it's tough to really say seriously. I think LSU can make it to the college football playoff.
Is there a chance that there could be 2 Big Ten teams in the playoffs?
No,
If you have a one-loss Wisconsin?
not with the national.
Well,
landscape.
you're for that. Are you saying?
Actually, yeah, that's
You're saying
not possible
Ohio
'cause they'd
State.
have to
You're
lose.
saying Wisconsin beats Ohio State in the regular season and loses to them in the Big Ten.
You could have a one-loss Penn State with their only loss being to
No, I
Ohio
think-
State.
That's not even possible because if Wisconsin loses to Ohio State in the regular season but beats them in the Big Ten, you have two one-loss Big Ten
But you
teams
could
who
you
beat each
could
other
you
out.
could have an undefeated Ohio State and a one-loss Penn State, with Penn State's only loss being to
Ohio
Ohio
State.
State.
Well, yeah, you could also have one loss, like Wisconsin beats Ohio State in 2 weeks. Then they get a Big Ten title rematch because Ohio State runs the table, and Ohio State beats them then, and you have one loss Big Ten champ Ohio State, one loss lost in the Big Ten championship, but beat them earlier in the season, Wisconsin. I don't
That'd
know.
be a really good, interesting scenario.
Yeah, but Griffin, what are you? You haven't given us your 6 yet.
6. I'm putting Clemson at 6 for sure. Oklahoma is definitely in my top 4. I don't think you can ignore just kind of the
Who's-
domination of that offense.
Who's
I
five?
just defense. I'm still not sold.
So who's your top 4 from 1 to 4?
You know,
I think you gave us your 6.
it's
but not your
hard
top.
for me to It's hard for me not to put Alabama number 1, just
No,
year
that's-
in and year out.
Yeah.
Especially because Clemson seems to have slipped a little bit, and that seemed to be the only program that was really touching them in the last couple of seasons.
Ohio
And
State.
so Ohio State at a close second for me. Then I think we're going to go LSU and Oklahoma, with Georgia number 5 and Clemson number 6. I don't feel bad about that list.
What do you guys think about Florida? They're pretenders?
Florida jumping.
I don't think they're pretenders.
If they beat LSU,
If they run the table.
But I don't think they have the offense to beat LSU this year.
I mean,
Not with
Crazier
that-
things
especially
have
not without
happened,
Felipe
as
Franks.
Griff likes to say.
Yeah, they lost.
I mean, taking a look at their schedule, if they beat LSU and then beat Georgia, then if their one loss to say would be to Alabama or Alabama in the SEC title game, that's a legit.
yeah, that's all
huge.
hypothetical.
Yeah.
The path is there for any SEC team because of the strength of schedule of that conference. It's just I don't.
As of
think-
today.
they don't have.
Yeah.
They lost their quarterback, and they don't. I just don't think they have the offense to hang with. I mean, even that game against Auburn, if you watched it, both of them looked kind of sloppy and turned the ball over quite a bit, and not that great offensively. They don't have the offense to stack up to LSU or Georgia. I think.
Well,
All
I
right.
think we've all given our opinions on top 10 matchups. I'm sure next week, you have LSU and Florida playing each other, and then you have Oklahoma and Texas. So there's sure to be some shakeups.
Clear, yeah.
Although things will be a little more clear. Like I think next week I'll probably have Alabama at number 1 just because they're probably not going to lose, and maybe LSU will, whatever. But let's kind of shift focus to talking maybe more about individual performances. Andy, you want to talk about Heisman contenders?
Right. Briefly, because we're getting short on time here, I think we can touch on Heisman. Right now, I think my leader, and this might be my hot take for the podcast, I think Joe Burrow is my favorite to win the Heisman right now.
Former
What-
Buckeye.
High on LSU, man.
Joe Burrow.
I am high on LSU. I think the difference in the if you consider the Heisman as a most valuable player award, I think it's hard to argue against Joe Burrow as a most valuable player. If you took, and baseball has a stat that you're very familiar with called wins above replacement, right?
Yes.
If you took
Good old war.
if you took
Good old baseball.
an average player and put them in X player's position, how much more valuable is? I think if there was a football war, Joe Burrow might lead the country in it, given what he's done for the LSU offense since he went there. They just look like a totally different team. The passing game has opened up for them, which has helped their running game, which was they've always had great backs, but they couldn't find that quarterback, that passing game for the long time, and Joe Burrow fixed that. And his numbers are ridiculous right now. He threw for 470 yards against Texas? Something like that?
He had a very good game
Against
yes.
Texas. And he was making throws where he was like running all over the pocket. And
Especially that one in the fourth quarter.
yeah, I think it's hard to argue against Joe Burrow for Heisman right now. That's my pick. I'm just going to make one pick.
Let me just posit a quick, brief question, and I don't know if you guys can just weigh in quickly. If Jalen Hurts is in the Heisman discussion at the end of the season, does the fact that the last 2 Oklahoma quarterbacks have won the Heisman in the past years almost work against him?
Yes.
In the
Yeah.
fact that
Yes.
it's just so obvious that it's the system
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Lincoln Riley. I mean, he's played very well this year, no doubt about it. I think Big 12 defenses also have something to do with how good Oklahoma quarterbacks do.
Yeah.
There's no way you can give a three-peat to Jalen Hurts if
in
he puts
one
a
program.
Yeah.
Just
Not even just because of that. It's because it's like, I mean, yes, guys can improve and stuff, but it was like he wasn't doing nearly any of this at Alabama, obviously because the system was completely different.
He was doing well though.
Yeah, he was doing well, but
he was still
he wasn't nearly as good of a passer as he is now. But I don't know. I just have a hard time just because think about the transfer portal would just become crazy. I would want to transfer to Oklahoma so I can get my Heisman.
he'd be in the top 10, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My hot take is going to be Jonathan Taylor. I think it's going to be the first time we have a running back in a while.
In a year of quarterbacks too, all the quarterbacks getting the hype. Yeah,
He's
I
been
mean,
going crazy.
he's a beast and he's setting records and all these
16
things.
touchdowns already. That's crazy.
His numbers are going to be ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think.
I don't think it'll end like that, but
I think the only way Jonathan Taylor wins the Heisman is if they beat Ohio State at least once. If they beat Ohio State once, then I think you could put them in the conversation.
I think if they beat him once, but the once has to be in the Big Ten championship game.
I don't even. Yeah, you have to be nationally relevant to win the Heisman. Usually, your team does.
Yeah.
I mean, the exception that I can think of is when Florida had 3 or 4 losses and Tebow still won.
Mm-hmm.
But
And guys, Ohio State's played one less game than Wisconsin, but you know who has more rushing yards than Jonathan Taylor?
J.K.
Dobbins.
Dobbins.
honestly, don't think he's getting
What
in a
did they say?
Heisman conversation.
John-
He isn't.
Who was it?
Fields is
Sports
overshadowing
Illustrated called
him.
him by his real name in an article. Yeah.
Jalen?
I don't know.
I don't know what it is.
I know what
I
it
thought it was
is.
like John. I don't know something.
Yeah,
bro.
I know what you're talking about. I just forget the specific thing because it was just.
It's not
bad.
Kevin, but like for example, it was like John Kevin Dobbins.
I mean,
That was like the new Sports Illustrated, right?
Yeah, and they were
Yeah,
like,
and it was like wow. Yeah, I was
But
like
I know
wow.
he used to go by Jalen.
that's weird.
Fields is getting all the hype, and it's mostly because of all the touchdowns he scores and like how big a recruit he was. Heisman annually tends to go to who gets the most media coverage. If you don't get the media coverage and the hype from other analysts for the Heisman Trophy, you won't win it. I don't think Dobbins is getting that hype, and I've even heard people call him the best back in the country, but they aren't talking about him for the Heisman Trophy.
Who knows?
I think-
Chuba Hubbard is going crazy right now.
Yeah, but that's Oklahoma State.
I think Dobbins and his Heisman chances get hurt by the fact that he himself has admitted he had a down year last year, and I think that it kind of like that reputation may proceed with him.
I don't think so, because like no one talked about that nationally.
And not
It's such a
necessarily.
national award.
Well, maybe so, but I don't know. It's just I think it could just be more that Ohio State's more of a complete team. Whereas
Yeah.
you look at like Oklahoma and Jalen Hurts, like he is their offense essentially.
Or Joe Burrow at LSU.
One person we didn't name is Justin Fields, but that man, who knows if he keeps playing the way he's playing,
It's possible.
it's definitely
I almost-
possible.
I think he'll earn at this rate. I'd imagine the New York invites would be Tua, Jalen, Joe,
and Justin.
and Justin.
Yeah.
I just think if you're looking at just straight up stats, that right now Fields' passing yardage is going to look
Really?
very low in
Yeah.
comparison to some of those other guys.
But his
Like
rushing
Dobbins,
touchdowns are
Dobbins
gonna
and
be-
Fields are probably just going to cancel each other out.
And
I don't-
We haven't even talked about Trevor Lawrence, who could still make a run at it. He hasn't looked like what people thought he would this year, but
Yeah.
I mean, he has the hype
don't
if he
know.
turns it around quickly.
I don't know. I
enough.
feel
Those
like
stats
I
aren't
feel like they'll
looking
throw
quite
in.
as-
I feel like for in New York they'll throw in one running back and it'll probably be Jonathan Taylor who just sits there. And
Jonathan
Watching
Taylor.
someone else collect that surface.
Realistically, it'll be Jalen Hurts getting it, maybe Joe Burrow second, and Jonathan Taylor will be third.
over, I don't know. I don't see him. I think I don't know, bro. We'll see.
We shall see.
Chase Young for Heisman. There's my hot take.
Hey, I wrote an article in the beginning of the year saying Ohio State has never had a Bednarik Award winner, and that Chase Young could be the first. And as of right now,
You might be leading the race. He's kind of that Nick Bosa type last year, where people called Nick Bosa the best player in America, before he got injured, despite the fact that he wasn't going to get any Heisman hype as at the end.
yeah,
He looked like the best player in the field last night if you watched the game.
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Planting the
I
flag.
mean, could you make an argument that Chase Young deserves a Heisman just for how impactful he is defensively as like arguably the best defender in the nation?
Yeah.
Could you make because we haven't like had like a legit like defender in the Heisman conversation since Manti Te'o.
Oh no, Dominican Sue.
No, Manti Te'o was later.
Yeah. Teo was later.
Taylor was
Sue was probably the one who should have won, but Te'o was later.
Oh, okay.
Sue was ridiculous. I think if Nebraska beats Texas that year, he probably takes it home. But Nebraska just wasn't.
Nebraska had
High
such a
enough
bad offense.
Yeah.
They had such a bad offense
They
that
were
year.
they weren't high enough ranked. Yeah. Is that about all we have for Heisman, though?
I think so.
About it,
I just
man.
wanted to bring up Chase Young because I think, I don't think he'll be realistically in the conversation. I just think he should be in the conversation.
Yeah.
Yes.
I just think it's the quarterbacks this year are just so dominant that there's no way. But I do want to touch on another sport for Ohio State quickly. I do want to touch on women's hockey. They swept St. Cloud State last weekend, and we have two players who got WCHA honors. Emma Malte was named Forward of the Week, which doesn't surprise me at all. She had a very good week as per usual. It's just she's just getting honored for it this week. But freshman forward Brooke Bink was named Rookie of the Week, and that is very nice and telling because it's nice to see a freshman already stepping up, getting her first career goal. She's tied for third with the most team shots right now at 14, and she has a couple assists going on. So it's nice to see a freshman really stepping up into a role that maybe like Lauren Boyle left so far, and it adds to the depth of this good women's hockey team. So just wanted to highlight them so far.
Some women's hockey players getting some honors. That's a really good team this year for Ohio State.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have many opinions on them currently, but
Well, it's good. It'll be interesting this Friday and Saturday this weekend. They're playing Wisconsin, and that's the best team in the country right now in women's. So
you'll find out then.
yeah, as Griffin mentioned last week, they usually play Wisconsin well, but we'll see if that's the case for them this year. We'll see if that's the case. Indeed. But I do think that's all we have to talk about today. Please, thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Why do you say that?
I don't know. I just find it funny how he always says, and I think that's all. No, I'm joking with you.
Just let me do the outro,
Record the whole
man.
podcast because of that.
Please start over.
All right. Thank you very much if you've been watching and dealing with these lunatics for about 50 minutes. From Andy Anders, Griffin Strom, and Khalid Hashi, I'm Brian Nelson, and this has been another episode of the Best Damn Pod in the Land.
Yeah, boy.
See you later.